You cannot build a home for $800. You cannot even furnish a decent living room for $800. But a man named Marcus had the exact same reaction 2 years ago, standing in a field in rural Tennessee, staring at a structure that was already fully upright, already sealed against the rain, already holding its shape in 40-mile-an-hour wind, and already completely paid for. And then someone handed him the receipt. He read it twice. Then he drove home, pulled his mortgage statement out of a drawer, and stared at the number in the top right corner that told him how many years were still left on it. 22. And something shifted in how he understood the situation he was living inside. What Marcus was looking at is called a Quonset hut. The shape has been around since World War II. But a new class of mini Quonset kits has emerged in recent years, and one model in particular breaks the price floor so completely that the number still does not feel real to most people who see it for the first time. Under $800 for a complete arch shell, not a tent frame, not a temporary structure, a galvanized steel weather-sealed, structurally sound arch that you can insulate, wire, and live in. And the reason you have never heard this discussed seriously is not a mystery. It is because the people who profit from your mortgage need you spending your attention somewhere else. Before I go any further into how this works and what the real total cost looks like, I want to tell you about something I put together specifically for people sitting where Marcus was sitting. Everything I am covering today, plus a great deal more than one video could ever hold, is gathered into a book called The Quonset Home Guide. Build it cheap, leave rent behind, stay warm all winter. It covers everything from site selection to sealing the shell for a hard winter, with real numbers and real lessons from real builds. You will find it linked right in the description below. Now, let me explain why this shape is the most underrated structure in the affordable housing conversation happening right now. Here is what nobody ever explains properly about a Quonset arch. The shape itself is doing the majority of the structural work. An arch is one of the oldest and most reliable load-distributing forms in human engineering. When weight or wind force pushes against the top of an arch, the arch redirects that load outward and downward into ground, not into the walls. That is why Roman aqueducts built 2,000 years ago are still standing in Europe today. Your standard American house works the opposite way. It has flat vertical walls and a peaked roof connected at a horizontal joint that is the most vulnerable point in the whole structure. Wind gets under that joint. Moisture gets in. Time finds every gap. The Quonset arch has no such joint. It is one unbroken curve from the ground on one side to the ground on the other, and that continuous curve distributes force so efficiently that it is genuinely difficult to collapse under normal conditions. The new mini Quonset models available right now are typically built from galvanized steel rib panels that bolt or lock together in a specific sequence, almost like assembling a large three-dimensional puzzle. The smallest units begin at just over 200 square feet of interior space, and the base kit for one of those small models currently sells for under $800 from several active suppliers. That price covers the arch panels. All require hardware in the instruction set. It does not cover foundation, insulation, and walls, doors, windows, or labor. And this is the exact point where people either stay curious or write the whole thing off because they hear $800 and assume they are buying a finished house. They are buying a shell. But the total final cost of the complete build is still going to shake something loose in how you think about housing. So stay with me through this part. The foundation is the first item you will address, and it is also one of the first places the mini Quonset saves you real money compared to a stick-built home. You do not need a deep reinforced concrete foundation. You do not need footings that extend below the frost line in most climates. A well-graded gravel bed, properly compacted and leveled, or a simple concrete slab of the kind you would pour for a large storage building, is enough to anchor and support a small Quonset arch. The full foundation cost, including gravel, anchor hardware, and concrete end aprons, can run anywhere from $300 to $800 depending on your region, your soil conditions, and how much of the labor you handle personally. What that means is the thing holding your home solidly to the earth can cost less than a single month of rent in almost any American city right now. A man named Tyler in rural upstate New York built his foundation for just under $400 using a compacted gravel pad and concrete footings at the arch base points. He said the most expensive single item in his entire foundation process was renting a plate compactor for a weekend. His neighbor across the road has a mortgage with a monthly payment of $1,900. Tyler's total monthly housing cost, including property taxes on land he bought outright, is under $200. Tyler is not a contractor. He is a high school science teacher who spent 2 weekends and watched a lot of instructional videos. That is the part nobody puts in the brochure. Now let's talk about insulation, because this is where most people assume the cheapest structure becomes the most uncomfortable one. The Quonset arch panels alone will not keep you warm in January in Montana. That is simply true, and any source telling you otherwise is not being straight with you. Raw steel conducts temperature rapidly in both directions. But here's the part that changes everything when you understand it. Insulating the interior of a Quonset arch is significantly less complicated and significantly less expensive than insulating a traditional framed wall system, because you are working with one open curved surface instead of dozens of individual wall cavities filled with bridging studs and vapor barriers. You can spray closed-cell polyurethane foam directly onto the interior of the arch, where a bond of metal seals every penetration point simultaneously and creates a thermal barrier that reaches an insulation rating of around R6 per inch of thickness. At 3 to 4 inches, you are looking at an R value between 18 and 24 across the entire interior surface. That is the insulation level the Department of Energy recommends for walls in most of the United States. Materials for a self-applied foam kit covering a small Quonset typically run between $500 and $1,200. A contractor spray job on the same space will cost more, but even at the top of that range, you are still paying a fraction of what conventional insulation systems cost on a framed house of equivalent size. And here's the physics that most people miss entirely. Because the Quonset arch has less interior surface area than a square room covering the same floor space, it naturally has fewer places for heat to escape. Fewer square feet of wall, and ceiling means fewer pathways for thermal loss. The result is a structure that heats up quickly and holds that heat longer than a rectangular box of equivalent size. This is not a marketing claim. It is basic geometry applied to building science. Quonset owners in genuinely cold climates, places like Minnesota, Wyoming, and Upper Michigan, consistently report heating bills that make their neighbors ask uncomfortable questions. A man named Derek in central Minnesota said his entire heating cost for the 3 coldest months of the year was under $320. His co-worker, living in a stick-built house of similar square footage 2 miles away, paid that much in a single month of January alone. Derek said when he first told people those numbers, they thought he was making them up. He started keeping the receipts so he could show them. Here is something else the construction industry rarely volunteers. A Quonset arch contains no lumber. There are no wooden wall studs to absorb moisture and slowly rot over time. There is no roof decking to swell after a wet winter. There are no wooden trusses to burn in a fire or buckle under a heavy snow load. The galvanized steel arch is, by its nature, resistant to things that silently destroy conventional homes over decades. Termites cannot damage steel. Mold cannot colonize bare galvanized metal. And unlike wood frame construction, the arch panels do not expand, contract, or shift with seasonal temperature changes in a way that opens new cracks and lets weather in year after year. Several of the original military surplus Quonset units from the 1940s are still standing and still in active use on American farms and ranches right now. That is an 80-year track record on a structure that critics still call temporary. Think about that the next time someone tells you stick-built is the only durable option. So now the question you have probably been building toward this entire time. What does the full build actually cost when you add everything up honestly? Here's the real number, not the floor and not the ceiling, but the realistic middle of what actual builders are reporting when they document their projects. For a small Quonset in the 200 to 250 square foot range, built on a compacted gravel pad, insulated with spray foam or rigid foam board to an adequate thermal rating, fitted with a pre-hung insulated steel door and 2 or 3 small windows, wired with a simple electrical panel and basic interior lighting, and finished inside with clean plywood panels or tongue and groove with cladding. Most people are landing somewhere between $7,000 and $14,000 total. That wide range reflects real, genuine differences between rural land in Kansas and a suburban plot in Virginia, between a man doing every bit of the labor himself and one hiring out the electrical and concrete portions. But even the high end of that range is still less than 4% of the current median American home price. You could save that amount in under 3 years on a modest income and own your home completely debt-free on the day you finish the last panel. No bank owns a piece of it. No interest accrues while you sleep. There is no 30-year clock quietly running behind every financial decision you make about your life. Here is something that will reframe how you think about the timeline. A man named James in Central Texas ordered his kit on a Tuesday, had it delivered his property on a Friday, and had the arch fully assembled and standing by Sunday afternoon. 2 days. He used 2 friends, a drill, a rubber mallet, and a rented lift for the peak panels. When he stood inside that arch Sunday evening with the door panel leaned against the opening and the wind outside, he said it was the first time in his adult life that something he was building with his own hands felt like it could outlast him. He has been finishing the interior over the following months, living in it rent-free, with his total out-of-pocket still under $9,000. James had a mortgage before. He sold that house, paid it off completely, and has not signed a loan document since. A man named Greg in rural Georgia retired at 51 specifically because he eliminated his housing payment this way. He bought 5 acres in an unincorporated part of the county for $28,000, built his Quonset over 4 weekends with help from his brother and a friend named Paul, and now lives in a completely paid-off home with total monthly housing costs below $250, including property taxes and insurance. He said the moment he stopped paying rent, he felt something lift off his shoulders that had been sitting there so long he had stopped noticing the weight. He noticed it the day it was gone. He says he does not know how to explain that feeling to someone who has not had it, but he says he will know immediately. Now let's talk about the real obstacles, because they exist and skipping them would be dishonest. Zoning is the largest one by a significant margin. Many counties across the country have minimum square footage requirements for legal primary dwellings, and those minimums can make a small Quonset technically non-compliant as a full-time residence. Some jurisdictions require 900 square feet. Some require more. A 200-square-foot Quonset does not pass that threshold on its face. But here is what most people never discover until they start actually looking. These rules operate at the county level, not the state level, and they vary enormously from one county line to the next. There are rural and unincorporated areas in nearly every state where small structures are completely legal as primary residences. The strategy is not to fight a regulation you discover after you have already purchased your land. The strategy is to research before you spend a dollar. One phone call to your county planning office, asking specifically about minimum habitable space requirements, accessory dwelling unit classifications, and whether the county has adopted Appendix Q of the International Residential Code, can give you the entire picture before you commit. Research the county before you buy the land, and then buy land where the answer is already. The second obstacle is the people in your life who will tell you this is a bad idea without having looked into it for a single minute. They will say it looks unusual, that it will not appreciate and value the way a conventional home would, that you should buy something that looks like every other house on the street. What they will not mention, because they probably have not done the math, is that the average American pays somewhere between $400,000 and $700,000 in total, principal and interest combined, for a home that is worth less than the purchase price on the day the final mortgage payment clears. The man living completely free in a paid-off Quonset on land he owns outright is not the one making the financially questionable decision in that picture. The third obstacle is one I want to name plainly. A small Quonset is small. If you are currently living in 2,000 square feet, 200 is a real compression. The people who build these homes and genuinely thrive in them are people who have made a clear and conscious decision that owning their space completely, without any institution holding a claim over it, is worth more to them than extra square footage they rarely use anyway. That is a personal calculation, and only you can run it accurately for your own life. What I can tell you is that the structure is real, the price is real. The freedom that comes from building a paid-off home on land you own without a bank involved in any part of it is something no mortgage statement can replicate. The math is not complicated. The shape is not complicated. The only complicated part of this entire picture is everything the housing industry has spent decades constructing around this idea to keep your attention pointed somewhere more profitable for them. If you want the complete roadmap, every step from choosing your land to finishing your interior walls to staying genuinely warm to the worst winter your state has ever produced, is all waiting for you in the Quonset Home Guide. Build it cheap. Leave rent behind. Stay warm all winter. The link is right there in the description below. Go get it. And then do one thing before you close this video. Look up the minimum square footage requirement for a legal dwelling in your specific county. Not your state, your county. And leave that number in the comments below. I want to see exactly how high the wall is where you live. Because knowing the wall is the first step to finding the door around it.